you're all here. Also on screen with me are MAPE's Executive Director, Lena Jamul, and Business Agent, Alex Erickson, who will be answering your questions. We are pleased to welcome Enterprise Director for Employee Classification and Compensation, Dory Leland, from Minnesota Management and Budget, better known as MMB. Dory will also be answering questions along with Lena, Alex, and me. Pandemic-related budgetary challenges, including the recently projected $1.3 billion deficit for the next biennium, prompted MAPE and other labor unions to work with MMB on an ERI, Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. That will be the last of the government acronyms I introduced to you today, I promise. This MOU provides state agencies with a cost savings tool to prevent layoffs and other voluntary options for employees to leave state service. I'm now going to turn it over to Executive Director Lena Jamul, who will talk more about the MOU and next steps. Hey, Lena.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. It's good to see so many people here, and I notice we're still trickling in. I am Lena Jamul. I'm the Executive Director of MAPE. There's some knocking on my door, so you might hear some noise here interrupting us. We know that many members have been worried about job loss with the state facing projected deficits and an uncertain economic forecast. We knew that we needed an option on the table that was a cost-saving tool that employees could opt in voluntarily in order to prevent or minimize layoffs. So while not ideal, because we do know that the more people who use this early retirement incentive, then it means less people in state service. Like the hiring freeze, those are, they're cuts to state government. That have impact. And so while not ideal, as Megan said, we did join with other unions to advocate for cost-saving solutions like the early retirement incentive, because really what we wanted to do was prevent job losses through layoffs and have a different cost-saving option on the table. So this MOU, I'll repeat the acronyms. I know Megan went through them. A Memorandum of Understanding that was negotiated between all the unions, all the state labor unions, and Minnesota Management and Budget, MMB, now has to go through the Subcommittee on Employee Relations. So the SCR, the Subcommittee on Employee Relations, assists the legislature by providing interim approval of negotiated agreements. If you all remember, our contract goes through the SCR, and so these MOUs will be like that. The subcommittee consists of 5 House members and 5 Senate members. So this year, the subcommittee is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. So it's an evenly split committee. So once the SCR gets the MOU, and they got it in early December, they have 30 days to either accept it or reject it. If the subcommittee does not approve or reject it during the time, the MOU will automatically go into effect. And so, say for example, they don't meet at all, that's considered neither accepting nor rejecting, and so it automatically goes into effect after 30 days. So the SCR has 30 days to act, and if they do not act in those 30 days, the MOU will go into effect. So the SCR now has the MOU in their hands, or their electronic hands. We're expecting that early retirement incentives to go live, as it were, to be rolled out around January 4th, 2021. So once it is in effect, each agency, this is an agency discretion tool. So an agency will have to, will decide whether they want to opt in or not, and that's going to be based on their budgetary challenges. And they also have the discretion of how it's implemented inside the agency. And we're going to go through the MOUs when Dory Leland, the Director of Compensation from MMB, joins us to do that. And you'll soon learn that the timing is the employees, MMB would like employees to retire by March 31st to be eligible for the early retirement incentive. And so I want to talk a little bit about what's happened. We asked Dory to join us a little later because we wanted just some time with just us. And what will happen is that Dory Leland will go through the MOUs with everyone, and then we will take questions and answers. And it's not a perfect MOU. Particularly, there are things that we would have preferred if there was more employee choice versus agency discretion. Of course, we would have preferred the amount to be more than it was. We would have liked the timing to be different, but we're not going to go through all of that. And they will, MMB will present the agreement as it stands, and then we'll take questions and answers from everyone, and then Dory Leland will leave around 12:45, and then we'll have again 15 minutes with just us on the call. So let's see, we're running a little ahead of schedule as we wait for Dory. Are there any, if you have questions, Alex, do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit of how we're going to handle questions on the webinar today?
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Alex Erickson. I'm an organizing business agent here at MAPE. Thanks everybody for joining us, educating yourself and, giving yourself the ability to educate your peers and colleagues. Retirement is a very important thing. Of course, it's something that we hope you only go through once, so a lot of that information is going to be, based on sort of your own personal finances and your own personal situation. So if this is something that you are considering, I think that it would be a very good idea to try to contact MSRS, schedule an appointment with a counselor, and look at your numbers, right? Because at the end of the day, the MOU is just a small piece of that, and the healthcare savings plan dollars is a pretty small piece overall of what we would call sort of your retirement portfolio, or your overall savings. So please start doing the legwork. Just to determine if this is something that ends up being offered in your agency to you or your job classification that right away, if you're in a place to retire or not, regardless of the MOU, or maybe if the MOU is something that shifts that calculus, that is going to be very different for each and every individual person. So that's just sort of my my upfront guidance to be doing that work concurrently. We're doing the best we can to explain the MOU, to put some information on the website, to go through some sort of pension basics, and that's all important. But at the end of the day, it's a very individual decision. Everybody's circumstance is very different. So please start doing the work to try to think about that. So when it comes to questions, if you could actually just message me directly. That's the sort of system that we've set up to avoid what I think now in the digital world we call the waterfall effect, where the chat sort of lights up like a Christmas tree, and things tend to get buried that way. So please just state your agency, and then I'll try to be, sort of moderating questions and then dispositioning them to Lena, Megan, and Dory, depending on what the sort of the content of the question is. So if you can include your agency, that would just be some fun information to have that we will share. And then Lena, did you want to try to start doing a few questions before Dory shows up?
Sure, let's do that and let's test that. So if you have questions, just chat them to Alex, and Alex will moderate for us. So let's get a question in before Dory joins us.
Okay, yeah, I've already got one. This is from Mary, who asks, by when will agencies state whether they'll opt in or out? And I think that we actually have a pretty good idea on this. So Lena, do you want to take that?
Sure, and that is an excellent question for Dory, because as you know, we negotiate the MOU with MMB, but MMB and MSRS and the agencies are all the administrators of this process. And so, they're still working through all of that, and that's why we wanted them here to really explain how they're gonna implement that. So we are the unions and MMB have a weekly conference calls, and MMB is committed to us that they will give us updated information about which agencies are opting in during those calls, and we will get that information out to all of you. But let's save that question for when Dory joins us.
Okay, let's see here. This is from Lynn, I believe, in Minute. The question is, if a person works for Minute at an agency, does the ERI follow Minute's rules or the agency's, which is a sort of a common question for benefit structure. So either Lena or Megan, if you want to take that.
Yeah, if you work for Minute, then you work for Minute as an agency, even if it's Minute at, and so Minute will, as an agency, will decide how they're going to roll it up. So it could be, for example, you could be Minute at, let's say, Department of Health, for example, where Department of Health might not opt into the early retirement incentives, but Minute would opt in, and so you may be eligible for that. But I think Dory has joined us, so I want to welcome Dory Leland, who's the Director of Classification and Compensation at Minnesota Management and Budget, and has done a lot of work to put this early retirement incentive together, and worked with all the unions to get agreement on that. And Dory will let you take it away so that you can walk us through the two MOUs for everyone's information. We've got over 200 folks here on the webinar with us, and then there's a few hundred too watching this on YouTube
Wow.
Live.
Great, big audience. So thanks for having me today. It sounds like you guys were talking about ERI before I got on, so you may hear some of this stuff twice, which I guess wouldn't be bad. I'm sure you all know where we're at right now with this process is that we have negotiated an MOU with MAPE and with the other unions to offer early retirement incentives in kind of a couple of different buckets. We submitted the agreement to the subcommittee on employee relations, and right now we're kind of waiting to see if they're going to weigh in or not. If they don't say anything within 30 days, then we get to move forward with the program. There's also the possibility that they are going to want to meet and talk about it. And so if that happens, then we'll be prepared to offer some testimony about why we thought that this was a good thing to negotiate. And we'll probably reach out to you, Lena, as well, if that becomes the case. I don't have any indication right now whether or not that's going to happen. But if we make it to the beginning of the year and we're able to offer this incentive, the incentive that will be that most of the people on this call would potentially be eligible for is kind of the bigger MOU or the bigger ERI program. If agencies choose to participate, what they need to do is put together a plan with how they're going to offer it within their agency, and then they would submit that plan to MMB for approval. The reason why we're having agencies submit it to M&B for approval is we're trying to make sure that when agencies put together their plan for offering an incentive, they've thought through if they don't want to offer it to every single eligible employee in the agency, we want evidence that the agency has thought through why this particular division or why this particular job classification. And then they've thought through some of the potential equity concerns with this kind of incentive. And by that, I mean, if they have more people interested than they can offer it to, what is their plan for deciding who gets it? And there's some perfectly legitimate reasons for deciding who gets it. And then there's some less legitimate reasons for deciding who gets it. And so we want to force agencies to go through the process of doing some of those considerations ahead of time. The group of employees that's potentially eligible for the biggest incentive would be anybody who is eligible at the time of retirement. So it doesn't necessarily need to be at the time that you notify the agency, but as of the date that you want to retire, are you eligible to receive a retirement annuity? And that includes a reduced retirement annuity. So we're all kind of contributing into these various retirement plans. And at some point we become eligible to retire under that plan. It's a little bit different depending on what year you started and whether you're in MSRS or a different type of retirement plan. But at some point you become eligible for an annuity. And so if you are eligible for an annuity, and if you have been in a state service for at least continuous state service for at least 5 years, if you are a classified employee, we do have left open the possibility that some unclassified, it may be appropriate for some unclassified employees, but we're asking M&B to kind of weigh in on those on a case-by-case basis. So eligible for retirement annuity, at least 5 years of service, a classified employee, and then if you are in a division or program area at an agency that's going to be permanently eliminated or reduced, either because the business needs of the agency has changed or because of the pandemic, the agency has decided it's no longer going to be able to offer this particular service or program. So if reductions are kind of already planned in a certain area, this MOU would allow agencies to offer an ERI incentive rather than layoffs. So that's one circumstance where the employee might potentially be eligible. The other path to eligibility is if the employee who otherwise meets the criteria, if they're in a position that the agency would be able to hold vacant for at least a year to capture some of the cost savings that would come from no longer having to pay salary. So that wouldn't necessarily need to be in a program area that's going to be permanently eliminated or reduced, but it's in a program area where the agency thinks that they can kind of get by if they have a position vacant for at least a year or more. I'm sure everybody wants to know, well, is my position one of those? And that's not something I can answer for every agency. That's kind of an agency specific determination that they're going to have to make if employees are in a position that they think that that division or department would be okay to have nobody doing that role for at least a year, or that they could hold off on hiring behind that position in a permanent way for at least a year. If an employee is offered and does accept an ERI incentive, the employee agrees that they're not going to return to state service for at least a year. This is intended to be for people who actually want to retire, not for people that just kind of want to take a break. So if people are intending to kind of permanently retire or at least agree to not return or even look for work for at least a year, that would be one of the things that an employee would agree to do as part of the incentive. There's sometimes the employee might need to come back on a post-retirement option or pro to kind of for some knowledge transfer for the remainder of the agency, but we're anticipating that's not going to be a super common occurrence. The intent is that when people accept the early retirement incentive, they actually do retire. And so that means all your sick leave is going to be paid out, and whatever percentage portion it is for severance, all your vacation is going to be paid out. You will actually separate from state employment and be shown as retired. I just realized I forgot to talk about the amount of the incentive. So that's how you become eligible. But for the amount of the incentive, we're doing something a little bit different than we've done in the past related to this incentive, to incentives like this. The percentage, the amount that an employee would be eligible for is $1,000 per complete year of service, and it's capped at $30,000. So if you've been here for 42 years at the point that you retire, the maximum amount you could receive in the benefit would still only be $30,000. And that amount of up to $30,000 would be deposited into the employee's healthcare savings account. There's some tax advantages for both the employer and the employee related to healthcare savings account, and that's the only method of distribution that's permitted under this ERI program. There's no option to take it in cash or through some other method. I can stop now for questions before we move on to the SERP one. And Lena, let me pull up your email to see if there's other specific things you wanted me to cover here.
Do you want to go on to the SERP one, and then we can take Q&A for both of them?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So for that first MOU, the big one that I just talked about, that's for employees who who aren't eligible for any other type of early retirement incentive. And that's most of our employees. But so for our employees that are eligible for SERP, and if you don't know if you're in SERP, you probably aren't. But SERP is the Corrections Early Retirement Plan. So for folks that have as part of their job that they spend most of their time with offenders, either at corrections or DHS, or I think there's a couple of other contexts. For those folks, you're already eligible for an early retirement incentive as part of your contract and by statute. And so it doesn't make sense to offer the same type of incentive that's available for the larger population. So for folks that are eligible for SERP, there's already language in the MAPE contract about people who, if you retire at the age of 55 or later, you're already eligible to receive the employer's contribution to health insurance for the next 10 years or until you reach the age of 65, whichever comes first, I believe. But for those in SERP who are between the ages of 50 and 54, you have the option already in contract to retire early and to receive a lesser portion of the employer's contribution towards health insurance. So the earlier you retire, kind of the more you would have to pay towards that contribution. And then as you get closer to the age 55, the employer portion increases. So for folks that are in that category between the ages of 50 and 54, if you would like to exercise the option that you already have to retire early before the age of 55, the incentive for you is a lump sum amount of $20,000 that would be deposited into your healthcare savings account. It's not based on the years of service calculation the way it is for everybody else, just because of the way that your ERI program is already set up. For folks that are in SERP, the amount is a flat amount of $20,000.
Great, thank you, Dory. Alex, what questions do we have?
Yeah, we have quite a lot. Let me just peruse.
Okay.
So this actually would probably be a good one for Lena really quick. We've got quite a few questions about Rule of 90. So if somebody, is eligible for Rule of 90, is this ERI something that would be available to them?
Yes.
Yes.
It's the short answer, right, Dory?
Yes, that's the short and accurate answer. The reason why it's available is because we don't consider Rule of 90 to be an existing early retirement program. It changes the point at which you're eligible, but you don't get an extra incentive, a dollar amount to be in Rule of 90. And so, yes, if you're eligible for Rule of 90, and if your agency chooses to offer it, then you would be eligible, yes.
Great. Okay, so the next one is let's try this. Let's see how this works. A two-parter. So the first one will be for Megan, which is what is the date that I would currently have to retire by? And then we have quite a few questions about, I think that this should go to Dory, about what potential is there for extending this benefit past March 31st? You know, if the agency, for example, decides that a position, you know, could possibly be left vacant for a year after that March 31st date, you know, or if the budget forecast for the agency evolves, you know, the agency might become more willing or able to offer early retirement incentives. What could we expect with that? So if we could, first Megan and maybe then Dory.
Yeah, sure. Great question. And Alex gave the answer there. So it's March 31st is the date that we're wanting folks to retire by, and you know, part of this is a cost savings measure to stave off layoffs, and so that date, I know we understand that it's a pretty short turnaround time to make a pretty big decision, pretty big life decision, which is, you know, why we have business agents here to support you through that process, and why we're doing webinars here. So. But again, March 31st is the date that we're hoping we're wanting folks to retire by. So then over to Dory.
Yep. And so the March 31st date is what the agencies were interested in signing off on, because they wanted to be able to capture the salary savings from this program within this fiscal year. But we've gotten a lot of feedback that that's a pretty short timeline for some people. And so the MOU does have an exception process where if that timeline needs to be extended, then we have the ability to extend it up to June 30th, 2021. And so at this point, it's a little early to predict whether we're going to do that or not, because we don't even know for sure if we're going to be able to offer it. We have to wait to get to the other side of the legislative subcommittee process. However, you know, I don't have any strong feelings about potentially extending the timeline. We based that timeline again based on agency feedback that they wanted to be able to know with enough advance notice by the end of the fiscal year kind of what their budget would look like based on how many people took this incentive. But if it makes sense to extend it, that's certainly something that we can do either on a case-by-case basis or even an agency-by-agency basis or a whole-scale basis, depending on what the interest is in the program and whatever makes sense both for you guys and for the agencies.
Great. Thanks, Dory. So this one is actually from our YouTube stream. So we see you and hear you, YouTube. Thank you. And I think this will probably go to Dory. How will the hiring freeze affect the 1-year delay in rehiring to be counted or considered?
Yep. So that's a completely fair question. It's something I'm working with the agencies on now related to that particular decision. It's a little tricky because the hiring freeze, I think, is anticipated to go through April, but we're not exactly sure. What I am asking the agencies to do when they put their plans together is to, even irrespective of the hiring freeze, think through if they were able to, is this the type of position that would be able to be left vacant for a year kind of under normal circumstances, if that makes sense. So right now there's an exception process where if agencies want to be able to hire, they need to submit a request to MMB to be able to post for certain positions. We're trying to keep these two analyses fairly separate. I know it's a little weird since we're in the middle of the pandemic and the hiring freeze and everything else, but since the hiring freeze is not intended to last forever, I hope, the intent is to have the agencies to think not just to the end of the hiring freeze, which is in potentially April, but think for the entire year, would they be able to go without, like if the hiring freeze were lifted tomorrow, would they still be able to live with having this position vacant for at least a year?
Great. This one is actually for Lena. What if I am in TRA? That question has actually come up. Does this apply to me?
Yes, this would also apply to you. So whichever retirement program you're in, it would not apply to you if you work for Minnesota State. Minnesota State has their own early retirement program, the BESI Board Early Savings Initiative. And so anyone in Min-State would fall under Min-State's BESI program that's there through the legislature, through statute.
Yep.
Great. And then this next one will be for Dory. I can't attribute this to just one person. So many people have asked it, but it is, when will I know that my agency has decided to opt in? And then also a lot of questions about how will those determinations be made? To include which classifications, and then there was also some questions about seniority or other factors that could affect it, or how those decisions get calculated. But I think that's a great one for you, Dory.
Sure. So I don't know yet which agencies are going to participate, but I know that a lot of agencies, HR departments and their leadership are kind of meeting internally and to talk with their budget folks right now about whether or not to offer it. The agencies do need to let M&B know when they're going to start offering a plan, and M&B needs to approve it. And I think it's appropriate to notify you guys when an agency has made the determination about whether or not to offer the program and how they intend to offer it. And so as that information becomes available, I can share it with you, and you can post it in whatever venue is appropriate for your members. In terms of how agencies are going to make this decision, the guidance that I am going to be giving agencies on this topic is to, think through, if you're already thinking about about doing reductions, how might this work? It kind of give you an additional tool as you're already having to think about doing employee reductions, and to think about it not in terms of who your favorite people are, but to think of it in terms of your program area needs. Would it make sense to think about doing kind of restructuring in a certain area anyway? Would it, for workforce planning purposes, might it make sense to create some vacancies in this area so that you could move some of those functions into another area? I can't predict exactly all the ways that agencies are going to think about doing this, but I think that the more common setup is going to be that agencies are going to identify certain job classes or program areas and then let employees know, rather than first asking employees to give their interest and then making decisions afterwards, because it's a lot more difficult to be objective once you are dealing with, the actual people that are asking for the incentive. And so I think what's going to happen is agencies are going to think, so I can, at M&B says, okay, I think that we want to make this incentive available for everybody who works in enterprise human resources management. And then they would notify all of the potentially eligible employees in that division area and say, we're making this program available. Please let us know your interest by, if you're interested in such a date, and we'll notify employees, thereafter if they're able to, if we're able to accept their request. In terms of seniority and all that, the guidance that I'm working on right now, if there are, say the agency knows that it can take 3 ERIs in a certain program area, but it has 10 people apply. I'm asking the agencies to think through how they're going to make that decision. But one option that they have to consider could be seniority, because that's a relatively neutral, it doesn't require any kind of protected status category. Seniority would be one of the objective methods they could use if if they get more requests in than they can accommodate. I know Minnesota State, when it's faced with this situation, I think they actually do a coin flip to decide which employee gets it. So the purpose of not to be, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of the decision, but my guidance to agencies is to think through what's an equitable method that relies on something other than anything that could potentially be considered protected class status, such as age, or obviously they can't make decisions based on race, gender, or anything like that.
Great, thanks, Dory. All right, let's see what else I have here. Okay, So this question is for you, Dory. It's about what does it mean if a position can remain vacant for 1 year? Is that something that you can speak to your manager or supervisor about, or what is the mechanism for a position being left vacant, and how is that different from some of the other categories?
Are you asking for a definition of what vacancy means?
I think that would satisfy. Yeah.
Yep. So vacancy in this context means that they're not going to post the position for competitive hire for at least a year. But so the position will remain vacant. However, for those of you that are familiar with the work at a class process or mechanism, work at a classes, an employee can move into a vacancy for work out of class position filling purposes, and that's something that would be allowed under this particular incentive. So it doesn't necessarily mean that nobody is going to be doing any of that work for at least a year. It's at least open to the possibility that the position is vacant, meaning you're not hiring an additional person to come in and do that job. But during the process of while it's vacant, there may be the option for other employees to kind of temporarily step into that role under the already existing work at a class process.
Great. And then this is from, I think, initials JK. How does medical and dental insurance work with this? I read somewhere that you can't keep your health insurance CGIP if you retire early. How is this different than retiring normally? I think that I can actually maybe take that and other people can chime in. Yeah, as soon as you leave employment from the state, yes, your CGIP health insurance, is discontinued. So the purpose of the early retirement incentive and programs like this in general is to try to sort of bridge the gap between that early retirement age of, we'll say 62, 63, 64, and when most people when people become Medicare eligible at age 65. So that's kind of the mechanism, to soften the blow and put money aside for people to spend on medical expenses, with the hope being that, along with the retirement dollars, that people will be fine healthcare wise. So if anybody else has anything to add, but I think that's a pretty fair answer.
Yep, I think so. And I mean, I think you're eligible to continue your CGIP coverage if you choose to, through COBRA or any other kind of separation, right? It's kind of costly, right? But you remain eligible for it. And so that's one of the purposes of the money in your healthcare savings account would to have those funds available to continue CGIP health coverage, if that would be your choice. If you can find different coverage elsewhere, your healthcare savings account money would be available for that as well.
Great, thanks. And then this is from Carol, although I can't just attribute to you, Carol. A lot of people have actually asked this. Can you defer the receipt of the retirement funds? Or other questions that we've received in the chat have been if you can defer the early retirement option or incentive. So I think that would be probably best for Dory as well.
So in terms of deferring the receipt of an annuity, I think the answer is yes, because we're not changing any of the statutory requirements around receipt of an annuity. And so lots of people retire and decide that they're not going to start taking their annuity until a later time because they have other kinds of funds. You need to be eligible for the annuity, right? But if you want to defer starting to take that annuity, provided that you're actually retired, but you're just deferring the receipt of your annuity, that seems to be something that would be permitted under this program. Could you defer the ERI portion of this? I'm not sure I actually understand the question, but I think the answer is probably no. I mean, if you're going to accept the ERI incentive of up to $30,000, you need to actually receive that and have it placed into your healthcare savings account. And you can leave it in there as long as you want, but you actually have to receive it, at the time that you retire, because one of the purposes of this program is so that agencies can kind of anticipate what their future staff costs are going to be once they have kind of paid off severance, vacation, and then this early retirement incentive at the point the person separates.
Thanks, Dory. So the next one we have is from Jim. And this is an interesting one. And there's been a few actually about public versus state service. and under the sort of the broad umbrella, I think, of who's covered by the retirement plans. So does the $1,000 payment per year, and that's for the general plan, MOU, everyone. The corrections MOU is $20K lump, right? So does the $1,000 payment per full year apply to state service years only, or does it also apply to other public service years, i.e. service years credited at higher for purposes of vacation accrual? Interesting.
Can you answer or say the last part of that question a bit again?
So
are you talking about for people that got a different accrual rate based on prior years of?
Yep, I think that's what's being asked.
The intent of the program is years in state service.
Okay, let me scroll through here. Okay, this has come up, and I know that we've talked about timeline, but Mary has asked, will agencies be setting deadlines for their employees to apply for this so they can fairly decide between the potential candidates? Or I think the other proposal being if there's a pool or a certain number, that is agency discretion, or is there any amount of timeliness that can, impact whether somebody would receive an ERI or not, I think is the best sort of phrasing of that.
Yes, we're certainly going to encourage that everybody's aware of the timelines when they roll out their program. And so one of the requirements that when agencies submit their plan to MMB, I want them to think through kind of the timelines of when they're going to open it, how long they're going to give people to decide, et cetera. I think that, good practice is to try to give people at least 30 to 45 days to kind of mull this stuff over. And I know we're working with pretty tight timelines here, but that's going to be my recommendation to agencies, that they provide employees with enough time to contact MSRS or whoever their retirement, whoever owns their retirement plan, talk to their families and kind of think through all of the financial consequences of retiring early. But will there be deadlines? Yes, but I can't commit to you right now what those deadlines are going to be. Other than that, I'm going to encourage agencies to give employees sufficient time to think through this very big decision.
Great. Okay, and then we actually have a SERP question from, I believe, Cheryl in Corrections. Thanks, Cheryl. So a SERP question again regarding insurance. If allowed to leave early between 50 and 54 and insurance prorated, is it right to assume that the cash given, $20,000, is be used for healthcare costs? Once you reach 55, is the insurance then paid for fully as would normally be the case? Or is there a penalty that continues after 55? What if you are 54 or 55 and need to get the 10 years of service to qualify for SERP? Can you leave earlier than the 10 years, and what happens with insurance then? And I think I can handle the first part, since you start getting vested, at 5 years in SERP, and then you're fully vested at 10, right? So that sort of covers the vesting question related to SERP. And then, Dory, if you have some ideas on the rest of that, it'd be great.
Yep. So we're not intending through this program to change anything about what currently exists. So whatever the plan currently provides for somebody who would retire at the age of 53 years and 6 months, whatever follows from that would be unchanged by this receipt. All this is a cash incentive to retire at that time. But whatever the current existing language is about how that impacts, a reduced annuity amount or a reduction in the employer's portion of insurance, whatever exists now will continue to exist, whether in the case that you would accept the cash incentive. What that means for you SERP folks is that this is going to make financial sense for some of you, but probably not for all of you. SERP is a pretty generous benefit, and the closer you are to the 50 end of the spectrum, the less likely this is going to be something that makes sense for you. But if you're closer, to the other end of the spectrum, the $20,000 is going to be more than what you would have had to just retire at that point. And so it's something that you'll have to kind of work through for yourself if it makes financial sense. In terms of, do we have to use the amount for healthcare expenses? Yes. I mean, whatever you're able to use your healthcare savings account for, it's limitations in that vehicle itself about what those funds can be used for. And so the cash incentive that goes into the healthcare savings account will be limited to expenses that are eligible under the terms of what a healthcare savings account is intended for.
Great, thanks.
That
And then
was
this
like an 8-part question. Did we hit all of it?
I think so. Yeah, that was
Okay.
great. Thanks. So this is from member MB, I think, and this is a good one. I think I can actually, handle this. Is this available to non-cabinet level agencies, e.g. boards? What a good question. And I would say the answer is yes. If you are, eligible for an annuity, as we've covered, you're in the bargaining unit, you're covered by one of the unions like ours, in this MOU, and you're otherwise, somebody, who is in the pension system, then yes, this would be available to you.
Correct. And if you have friends in the judicial and legislative branch, this is not something that would be available to them unless they separately want to request that. So this is just for executive branch employees that are in MAPE or one of the unions that signed on to the MOU.
Okay, and then this actually has come up a few times. April has asked, if I am already at full retirement age and just choosing not to retire, can I choose to retire now and get this incentive, even though it is not technically early? So I think sort of a question of semantics, I think.
It is, and I think it's a fair question because this program is different than it was in 2010. In 2010, it really was only early retirement. So people who were under the age of 65 or 66 or whatever retirement age was. This one, there's no limit on that. And so if you are 67 or 72 and just haven't gotten around to retiring yet, and your agency offers this to your particular area, then yes, this would be something, even though it's not early. The purpose of the program is to encourage people to retire earlier than they would have otherwise. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be earlier than, not even necessarily. There is no age cap on limitation on being able to retire, provided that you're otherwise eligible to receive an annuity.
All right, and then this question is from member Elizabeth. Can you talk more about, and this is a great one, thanks Elizabeth, really. Can you talk more about the post-retirement option for knowledge transfer? How does that work? Because of course for everybody, everyone on the line, right, there is language that allows for people to come back to do this work. So Dory, if you could maybe talk about that.
I can. So I'll tell a quick story first. There was an early retirement incentive that was available at only a single agency a couple of years ago. And there was a situation where the employee received the early retirement incentive and then came back the next week in basically the same job that they were in. And that didn't go over super well in the press because the early retirement incentive that the employee received was pretty generous. And they came back to basically a full-time job after they had retired. So we're trying to avoid situations like that. Pro appointments are something that exist now. They're not benefit eligible positions. There's already limitations around how long you can do a pro, and without it affecting other kinds of things that you receive in retirement. And so for some folks, especially given the short timeline, they want to be able to retire before March 31st, but they've got these big jobs and they're the only person at their agency that knows how to do things. And so in those cases where they may not get everything that they wanted recorded and passed off to other people before the date that they retire, there may be some situations where the agency would say, hey, it makes sense to bring this person back as part of a pro appointment for 30 days or something, so they can kind of finish the handoff. I don't know that that's going to be appropriate in every single circumstance, but we didn't want to completely cut off employees who receive this incentive from ever contributing anything to their agency again, particularly given the short timeline. But we've limited it to pro appointments just so that it's focused, that if they do come back, it's focused on kind of a more gentle handoff of whatever their job would be to whoever is still at the agency to continue that work.
Great. And then I think that as we're kind of nearing on the hour, we're going to try to do one more. So this is a good one for all. And I think a good closing note just about the nature of the money. Can the HSA funds be used for any health insurance plan to pay premiums, or are some excluded, such as an HMO or low cost plan?
That's not information that I know. There may be some others on the call have more familiarity with what's allowed under the healthcare savings plan. That's not something that I know.
I think that probably sounds like a question for CGIP. So I'd encourage you for
CGIP
all of
or I
these,
think MSRS holds the healthcare savings.
or MSR, yeah. So for all these questions, for your particular individual circumstance and your choices, please do contact MSRS. Don't make any decisions before contacting MSRS and getting the full picture of how this will impact you. So Dory, we want to thank you for taking all the difficult questions, particularly as MMB and the agencies will be the ones administering this program. So we and our members appreciated hearing directly from you about the implementation of this.
Sure.
Thanks again for your work on it.
Thank you, Dory, for being here.
Yep. And as other questions come up, you know how to find me. So feel free to reach out as additional things come up. I think it probably will make sense once we know for sure that this is going out to have kind of an evolving FAQ document available, because I'm sure if one person has a question, lots of other people have that question as well. And so we will think about how to make those kind of FAQs available and updated as members are thinking through this, making these decisions.
Great idea. Thanks for your time, Dory.
All right.
Megan, thank you for your work.
Yeah.
We're gonna stay on here a little bit. Thank you for all your, oh, I think it's you, Megan. Oh no, sorry. I just totally jumped. Go ahead, Megan.
It's okay. We're gonna close out here. We've got 8 more minutes left, but we had a ton of information shared today, and there's still a lot of questions out there. This is a big decision that folks are making. So I want to go through some of the highlights, and like Dory said, we'll have facts available. You can always email myself or Lena or Alex here. But some of the highlights from today that we went over were the ERI. It's a cost savings tool for agencies facing budget challenges due to the pandemic to prevent or minimize more drastic measures like layoffs. So we're saving layoffs for people who would choose to leave state service instead. Again, we worked with the other unions. So it's an identical MOU with between MAPE and AFSCME and MMA and all of the other bargaining units. Nobody has anything different than any of the other unions. And that has resulted in the 2 different MOUs with MMB. So some of the eligibility requirements, again, are the employee must be immediately available to receive an annuity under a state retirement program at the time of separation. I think Dory covered that it wasn't the time of notice, but it's the time of separation rather. The employee must have at least 5 years of continuous employment at the time of separation. The employee must be employed in programs that are being permanently eliminated or reduced, or if the appointing authority determines that offering an ERI would lead to a vacancy of at least 1 year. And finally, the employee must retire on or before March 31st, unless MMB extends the timeline or permits an additional window of eligibility, which it sounds like they are at least open to doing. Again, this is a really important part here. Each agency will determine whether it will participate in the ERI. So it's not global that everyone is automatically opted into. And the MOU still has to be approved by the Subcommittee on Employee Relations at the legislature, either approved or not decided on. Upon receiving the MOU, which they did earlier this month, the SER has 30 days to accept or reject it. If the subcommittee either approves or does not reject it, so they take no action or they approve it, during that time, the MOU will automatically go into interim effect. It's the same function as our contract, if you know how that works. We are expecting that the ERI will be allowed to be offered, so agencies can opt in or not around January 4th, 2021. And the place again for your individual financial questions is MSRS. You can ask pension questions. Those are fellow MAPE members again at the Minnesota State Retirement System, and their website is msrs.state.mn.us. We have some eligibility information, so you can find out about those requirements and a lot of other information in an FAQ that we've already posted on our website at mape.org. We have fielded a ton of questions that have already come into our inboxes about the early retirement incentive. So I really want to thank all of you for your interest and your participation and your activity and your involvement with this process. So I'm going to hand it over to Lena to close us out.
Again, thank you to all of us for joining today. We hope the information was useful. Megan and I would like to hear from you about how 2020 has been for you. So we are having a more informal fireside chat on December 17th on Thursday at 11:30. It'll be about an hour. It'll be more informal than here today. There was a lot of information we needed to get at you today, but please join us on Thursday at 11:30 to let us know how your year's been. The pandemic has been a truly challenging year for all of us in our work, our families, our personal lives. We've both been connected and separated in unprecedented ways. So we want to, Megan and I just wanted to gather people together on Thursday to look back at the year, talk to you about what it's meant for us as a union, and what we're all looking forward to building together in 2021. You can go to our website for more information. And thanks for all you do for Minnesotans. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday if you join us. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.